Right now, orbiting hundreds of miles above your head, there's this 6.7 billion euro machine. And it actually knows more about your local environment than you do.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it knows the exact temperature of the ocean off your coast, the health of the crops in your state, you name it.
Yeah, it even knows whether the ground beneath your house shifted by, like, just a single millimeter yesterday.
Yeah.
And the wild thing is, you never interact with it directly.
No, never. But it still governs everything from the price of your groceries to the exact route your airplane takes.
It's crazy. We live in this world that's basically governed by invisible architecture. People expect high-resolution, real-time data about the environment the same way they expect water to flow when they turn on the tap.
Right. But the sheer scale of the engineering required to keep that data flowing is something most of us just never see. We take it completely for granted.
We really do. So today, we are taking a deep dive into that invisible architecture. We're pulling from a massive, up-to-the-minute Wikipedia article detailing the Copernicus program.
Which is the European Union's Earth Observation Initiative. It is a massive ongoing effort.
Huge. We are going to look at its history, the hardware it currently has in orbit, its ground operations, and the really intense freezing boots-on-the-ground testing happening right now, this month, in April 2026.
Yeah, our mission here is to show you how a network of satellites and ground sensors became the ultimate real-time health monitor for our planet. We're going to break down how this free data actually impacts your everyday life.
And we'll explore why hundreds of scientists are currently braving the Arctic just to ensure the next generation of space lasers actually work. So, welcome to the deep dive. And just to be clear up front, we are not just talking about dry, bureaucratic space policy today.
Definitely not. It is so much more dynamic than that.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when I was looking through the sources, the scale of Copernicus was honestly pretty hard to wrap my head around. The best way I could process it was to stop thinking of it as, a giant telescope pointing down at us. It's actually more like a smartwatch for the entire planet.
I really like that. The smartwatch analogy holds up surprisingly well when you look at how the architecture is designed.
Right, because the smartwatch tracks all these independent biometrics, heart rate, sleep, oxygen, and then it synthesizes them into an overall health score.
Exactly. And Copernicus does the exact same thing, but it uses 6 main interacting themes. So you have atmosphere, marine, land, climate, emergency, and security.
So it's constantly taking the Earth's vitals across all those areas.
Continually. But to understand how it pulls that off, you really have to look at its 3 pillars. So there's the space component, the in situ measurements, and the services component.
And that services component is where things get really wild for me. Because the foundational philosophy of Copernicus is that the data is completely free.
Totally open source. Anyone, anywhere in the world can just access it.
Which is great, but building and launching satellites is brutally expensive. I mean, the source data shows that between 1998 and 2020, this entire system cost an estimated 6.7 billion euros.
Yeah, it is a massive public investment.
So why on earth would the European Union spend billions to build a planetary smartwatch, only to just give the data away to anyone who asks? Like, where is the return on that?
Well, because treating the data as a free public utility creates this massive economic ripple effect. By opening the floodgates, the EU allows downstream services, so startups, researchers, agricultural firms, to build highly profitable tools on top of that raw data.
Oh, I see. So the government takes the upfront infrastructure cost.
Exactly. And the projected benefits to the EU economy alone are actually estimated at 30 billion euros through 2030.
Wow. Okay, so if I'm understanding this, it's a lot like providing free GPS data, right? The government built the GPS satellites, but making that data free is what allowed companies to build ride-sharing apps, food delivery logistics, all that stuff that generated trillions in economic value.
That is a brilliant comparison. That's exactly how it works. Let's look at a concrete example with Copernicus, just to ground it. Imagine an agricultural tech startup. They take free Sentinel-2 satellite imagery, which maps soil moisture and vegetation health down to a 10-meter resolution. It's incredibly detailed.
10 meters, so they can literally see individual plots on a farm.
Yes. So the startup takes that raw data, runs it through their own proprietary algorithm, and they sell a simple, easy-to-use app to farmers.
Right, because the farmer doesn't want to look at raw, multispectral satellite data.
Exactly. They just want to know what to do. So the farmer looks at their phone and sees exactly which corner of their field needs watering today and which part needs fertilizer.
That's amazing.
The farmer saves thousands on water and chemicals, the startup makes a profit on the app, and the overarching economy grows. And all of that happened because the initial space data was free.
The ultimate public good driving private innovation. I love that. But a smartwatch needs physical sensors, right? Let's talk about the space component you mentioned earlier.
Right, the hardware.
Yeah, because the sources detail this whole fleet of dedicated missions called the Sentinels, which were built by the European Space Agency. And here I actually have to push back a little bit on the whole concept.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, we have NASA, we have private companies launching rockets, every other week now? The sky is getting totally crowded with commercial imaging satellites. Why did Europe need to spend billions designing and building 6 entirely new families of Sentinel satellites? Aren't there enough cameras up there already?
It is really easy to look up and think the sky is just saturated with cameras, but what's fascinating here is the fundamental difference between a commercial camera and a highly calibrated scientific instrument.
Okay, how so?
Well, private companies launch satellites to serve paying clients. Their sensors might change from one launch to the next, their orbits might shift based on customer demand, or frankly, the company might just go bankrupt.
Right, they are beholden to the market, not to science.
Exactly. So if you are a climate scientist tracking sea level rise or global deforestation over a 30-year period, a patchwork of private, constantly shifting data is basically useless.
Because you lose your baseline. You can't compare a photo taken by some commercial startup today with a highly specific radar measurement taken 10 years ago by a different machine.
You completely lose the continuity. Europe recognized they needed autonomous, standardized, and uninterrupted data streams. That was non-negotiable.
So they built the Sentinels to be these dedicated public servants.
Yes, and each family is armed with a highly specialized capability. They aren't just taking regular photos. Take Sentinel-1, for instance. It doesn't use optical cameras at all. It uses synthetic aperture radar, or SAR.
I really want to dig into that because the physics of SAR are incredibly cool. It's not looking at light at all, right?
And even a little bit.
It's actively firing microwave pulses down at the Earth and just listening for the echo to bounce back.
Which gives it an incredible advantage over a regular camera. Visible light is easily blocked by weather. That means standard optical satellites are effectively blind over cloudy areas, or, obviously, during the night.
Right, half the planet is in darkness at any given time.
Exactly. But Sentinel-1's radar cuts right through dense storm clouds and operates perfectly in pitch-black conditions.
So if there's a disaster, it doesn't matter what the weather is doing.
That's the key. If an earthquake triggers a massive landslide or a hurricane causes catastrophic flooding, emergency responders cannot wait around for a sunny day to see the damage. Sentinel-1 measures the time and phase of the returning radar waves to map ground shifts down to the millimeter, regardless of the weather.
It totally shifts the paradigm from just taking a picture to actually performing a physical measurement. And then you have Sentinel-2, which does use optical imaging, but the sources call it high-resolution multispectral, which means it's seeing colors the human eye can't even process.
Yes, it is measuring very specific wavelengths of light, particularly in the near-infrared spectrum.
Why near-infrared?
Because healthy plants reflect a massive amount of near-infrared light due to their chlorophyll structure. So by comparing the visible red light a plant absorbs with the near-infrared light it reflects, Sentinel-2 can essentially see the photosynthetic health of a forest or a farm all the way from orbit.
That is wild. And then Sentinel-3 is monitoring ocean temperatures, and Sentinel-6 is doing this incredibly precise radar altimetry bouncing pulses off the ocean's surface and timing their return to the microsecond just to measure sea level rise.
It's a comprehensive suite of tools, and they aren't just launching one of each either.
Right, the sheer volume of hardware they are putting up is staggering. The sources outline a deeply aggressive launch schedule just over the last year or two to keep this whole constellation fresh.
The logistics of maintaining that baseline we talked about require constant replenishment. They fly them in pairs or constellations to ensure they revisit the exact same spot on Earth very frequently.
Just looking at the operational tempo recently, it's intense. In December 2024, they launched Sentinel-1C, and then 2025 was just a marathon.
It really was. We saw Sentinel-4A go up in July to monitor atmospheric trace gases. The very next month, in August 2025, Sentinel-5A launched for even broader atmospheric tracking.
And they didn't slow down. Sentinel-1D went up in November, and that was followed literally days later by Sentinel-6B in mid-November.
Launching multi-ton scientific instruments back-to-back like that, it proves this isn't just a launch-it-and-forget-it science experiment. It is treated as critical infrastructure.
Absolutely. But Here's the vulnerability I see with this entire setup.
Oh.
Satellites drift. Space radiation degrades delicate instruments over time.
That's true. It's a harsh environment.
So going back to our smartwatch analogy,
Yeah.
if my watch says my heart rate is 200 beats per minute, but I'm just sitting on the couch reading a book, I don't inherently trust the watch. I stop and check my own pulse physically.
Right. You need a reality check.
Exactly. If Copernicus is gathering all this data from hundreds of miles away in the vacuum of space, how do we know the satellites aren't just lying to us because a sensor degraded?
You have to double-check the pulse. This is the absolute necessity of the second pillar of Copernicus, which is the in situ data. In situ literally means in position.
So on the ground.
Yes. Without ground truth, space data is really just an educated guess.
But what does that ground truth actually look like? Are there, European Union Copernicus agents walking around with thermometers in fields?
Not exactly agents, no. It is a massive decentralized network of thousands of sensors all over the world. We are talking about weather stations bolted to the sides of freezing mountains, commercial airplanes equipped with atmospheric sniffers just flying their normal routes.
Wait, commercial planes have sniffers on them?
Oh yeah, lots of them gather data while they fly passengers around. Plus, you have cargo ships taking automated water samples as they cross the Pacific, and thousands of autonomous buoys floating in the deep ocean, sinking and rising to measure salinity profiles.
And all of those physical, earthly measurements are constantly being fed into the same servers as the satellite data.
Exactly. They are continuously assimilated into these complex forecasting models to calibrate the algorithms.
How does that work in practice?
Well, say Sentinel-3's orbital sensors calculate that the surface temperature of a specific patch of the Atlantic is exactly 15 degrees Celsius based on the thermal radiation it sees.
Okay.
But a physical buoy floating right there in that exact spot registers the water at 14.2 degrees. The system uses that in-situ reality check to adjust and correct the satellite's math. It is a relentless, ongoing loop of calibration.
It's a massive global teamwork exercise.
Yeah.
And the sources note that Copernicus doesn't even own all these ground sensors or auxiliary satellites, right? They rely really heavily on what they call contributing missions.
Yes, they basically plug in data from private companies and international partners to fill in the gaps.
Which seems like a smart way to do it.
It's highly pragmatic.
Yeah.
Why reinvent the wheel if someone else has already built a specialized spoke? The sources actually highlight a German commercial provider called AuroraTech as a perfect example of this.
What does AuroraTech do?
They operate a constellation of thermal infrared satellites that are built specifically to detect the early heat signatures of wildfires.
Oh, that's incredibly useful.
It is. So Copernicus integrates that proprietary data into its own ecosystem. That instantly upgrades its emergency management capabilities, and the EU didn't have to design, fund, and launch a dedicated wildfire satellite from scratch.
Which is a brilliant way to save money, because funding a space program of this magnitude is a pretty precarious geopolitical tightrope. I mean, you have dozens of nations pooling resources to build these machines.
And geopolitics can definitely get in the way of science.
Right. The sources actually mention a major financial hurdle that nearly derailed the entire next phase of the program. After Brexit, the UK exited the Copernicus program, taking a massive chunk of the expected funding with them.
Building high-tech space architecture requires deep, long-term capital commitments. You can't just pause half a satellite. The UK's departure created a severe funding shortfall.
But they managed to resolve it. The sources emphasize that in October 2024, the UK formally re-entered the initiative.
Yes, and that was far more than just a diplomatic reset. The influx of British capital returning to the program was the critical lifeline needed to secure the manufacturing and deployment of the next major evolution of Copernicus.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because that renewed funding brings us exactly to where we are today, in April 2026.
The expansion phase.
Right. We've established that Sentinels 1 through 6 are up there tracking everything from ocean heights to crop health. If we already have this comprehensive planetary dashboard, what could we possibly be missing that requires the ESA to design and build Sentinels 7 through 12?
It's a great question. Basically, we are shifting from broad environmental monitoring into the realm of targeted policy enforcement.
Policy enforcement, like space cops.
Sort of. The current Sentinels are excellent at showing us the general health of the Earth, but as international climate treaties become stricter, generalized data just isn't enough anymore.
We need specifics.
Exactly. We have glaring gaps in our ability to actually police those treaties. The Copernicus Sentinel expansion mission Sentinel 7 through 12 are engineered to solve very specific, urgent blind spots.
I get tracking ice and oceans, But as regulations tighten, let's be real, governments and corporations are absolutely going to start fudging their emissions numbers to avoid penalties. How can a satellite possibly police a specific factory's carbon output from space?
You have zeroed in on perhaps the most critical expansion mission of all of them, Sentinel-7, which is known as CO2M.
CO2M. Okay, what does it do differently?
Well, currently, we can measure the general concentration of carbon dioxide in the global atmosphere, but CO2 gets mixed up by the wind really quickly, and it is naturally absorbed and released by forests and oceans all the time.
Right, the natural carbon cycle is huge.
Right, so if a country claims they reduced their emissions this year, it's actually very hard to prove them wrong from orbit using current tech.
So how does CO2M change the game?
By tracking the fingerprints of human activity. CO2M is designed to specifically identify anthropogenic, so human-made CO2 plumes.
How does it tell the difference between a forest breathing and a factory burning coal?
It does this by measuring CO2 simultaneously with nitrogen dioxide, or NO2.
Oh, interesting. Why NO2?
Because NO2 is a highly localized, short-lived gas produced almost exclusively by burning fossil fuels. It doesn't stick around long enough to mix into the global background noise.
So it's like a tracer dye.
Exactly. By mapping the NO2 plumes directly back to their source, say a specific coal power plant or a massive traffic grid in a megacity, and combining that with high-resolution CO2 measurements, Sentinel-7 will separate human pollution from the natural carbon cycle.
So it literally sees the invisible exhaust pipe. That is an absolute game changer. You are talking about an independent, undeniable audit of global emissions. No more relying on self-reported spreadsheets from factories.
It takes the guesswork entirely out of the equation. And then looking at the poles, we have Sentinel-9, known as Crystal.
Right, for the ice.
Yes. As the Arctic and Antarctic warm at an accelerated rate, just knowing the two-dimensional spread of sea ice isn't enough anymore. We need to know its actual volume.
How thick it is.
Precisely. Crystal uses a dual-frequency radar altimeter to measure the precise thickness of the sea ice and, crucially, the depth of the snow resting on top of it. This is critical for predicting global sea level rise and ocean circulation patterns over the next century.
But, building these hyper-advanced radars and lasers in a sterile, clean room in Europe is one thing. Making sure they actually interpret the ice correctly from space is another.
Yeah, it's the hardest part.
Which brings us to the irony of the scientific method here. The sources detail an event happening right now, this very month in April 2026. The ESA hasn't just launched the satellites, they've sent an entire army of scientists up into the freezing Arctic.
Yes, the SEMSI campaign, the Copernicus expansion mission's sea ice experiment. It really highlights the brutal reality of that in situ calibration we talked about earlier.
It sounds freezing.
It is. Teams from the European Space Agency, NASA, and various universities are currently deployed in the extreme cold of the Arctic. They aren't just sitting comfortably in labs analyzing data, they are physically out on the sea ice.
So they're building multi-million euro space sensors, but they still have to send human beings out to freeze on an ice floe with an auger drill just to make sure the math works.
That is exactly the reality. They are literally out there taking physical core samples of the snow and ice. And simultaneously, while they do that, they are flying specially equipped aircraft overhead.
Carrying what, like test radars?
Yes, carrying prototype radars and radiometers that mimic the exact instruments that will eventually be on Crystal and another expansion mission called CIMR.
Okay, so they fly over the scientists on the ground.
Right. And by comparing the airborne radar readings with the physical measurements taken by the scientists standing right there on the ice, they can refine the algorithms perfectly. They are enduring sub-zero temperatures today, so that when the satellites launch in the coming years, their data will be instantly reliable.
That is incredible dedication. So, bringing this all back down to Earth for a minute. Why should you, the listener, care about scientists freezing in the Arctic or synthetic aperture radars or a bunch of acronyms orbiting the Earth?
It's a fair question.
Because this data is actively shaping the world you live in right now.
Yeah.
When your city council maps out where to build a new flood wall to protect your neighborhood, they're relying on Sentinel elevation data. When international bodies sign treaties to reduce emissions, they're going to use Sentinel-7 to verify if those politicians are actually keeping their promises.
Copernicus isn't just taking pretty pictures of clouds. It is providing the undeniable baseline facts that will dictate how humanity navigates the next century of climate change.
It acts as the ultimate impartial reality check for our species.
It really does.
To summarize what we've unpacked today, Copernicus is an unprecedented open-source dashboard for Spaceship Earth. Born from a necessity for autonomous environmental monitoring, It has evolved into a massive economic engine, generating billions of euros by letting anyone, anywhere, build tools using its data.
A truly open system.
Exactly. It's a system where space-based radar and optical sensors are constantly interrogated and verified by ocean buoys, mountain weather stations, and scientists drilling into Arctic ice.
And as we look toward those expansion missions, I want to leave you with a final thought to consider. We are crossing the threshold into an era of radical transparency.
Radical transparency.
Yes. Historically, environmental destruction, say, illegal logging in the deep Amazon, a factory venting toxic gas at night, or a nation secretly burning coal could be hidden by geography and plausible deniability. You just couldn't prove who did it.
Right. It was their word against yours.
But now that humanity has built this free, real-time, high-resolution monitor showing the chemical makeup of our atmosphere and the daily shifts in our landscapes, the excuse of ignorance is entirely gone.
Wow. That's true.
If an investigative journalist, a small startup, or just an everyday citizen can independently pull down satellite data showing the exact source of a CO2 plume, how will this unavoidable transparency change how we hold power accountable in the next 10 years?
That is a staggering realization. Plausible deniability is going extinct because the data belongs to everyone. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. If you want to see the health of the planet for yourself, I highly encourage you to look up the Copernicus data space ecosystem online.
It's free to use.
Yes, you can literally access the pulse of the Earth right from your browser. And the next time you glance at your phone and see a weather alert or an air quality warning, remember, you aren't just looking at an app. You are looking through the eyes of a sentinel, keeping watch from the dark. Picture organized crime in your head for a second. I am willing to bet you're probably imagining smoke-filled back rooms, right? Guys in fedoras talking with these gravelly voices, or maybe heavily armed cartel kingpins operating out of some jungle fortress.
Right, yeah, that's the classic image.
Exactly. We have this tendency to view it as this very binary world. You know, good guys and bad guys, cops and robbers. And it's all neatly organized into these shadowy, rigid pyramids of power.
Oh, absolutely. We've been deeply conditioned by Hollywood narratives to see these groups as, like, secret societies, complete with the blood oaths and the grand ceremonies.
Yeah. But what if the reality is closer to a corporate boardroom?
Yeah.
Or like a completely decentralized network of freelance computer hackers? Or,
Sure.
and this is wild, even an itinerant barber wandering from town to town in Ming Dynasty China.
It is a really jarring shift in perspective, isn't it? Going from a mafia don to a wandering barber. But if we strip all the movie magic away, what we are really looking at are highly adaptable, ruthlessly efficient economic systems.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are looking past the Hollywood myths to explore the true DNA of organized crime. We're going to break down how it evolved, how it operates as this unregulated economic engine, and the surprising psychological and sociological reasons it even exists in the first place.
Yeah.
And for you listening, this is not just, a round of true crime trivia. Organized crime directly impacts the taxes you pay, the security of your online data, and, well, the invisible social contracts holding your community together.
It really does. And to put the sheer scale of this into perspective, we aren't talking about a few shady deals happening in alleyways. Let's look at a benchmark from back in 2009. The UN Office on Drugs and Crime estimated that money laundering alone equated to 2.7% of the entire global GDP.
Wait, wow.
Yeah. We are talking about roughly 1.6 trillion US dollars moving silently through the legitimate financial system in a single year.
I mean, I need to stop you right there because $1.6 trillion in a single year is a number so large it almost loses its meaning.
It's massive.
That is the GDP of an entire industrialized nation, entirely off the books, just in money laundering. So to understand how criminal syndicates operate today at that multi-trillion-dollar scale, we really have to look at their origins.
Yeah.
Because this isn't a modern phenomenon born out of the 1920s Prohibition era, like the movies suggest.
No, not at all. It is a centuries-old response to economic opportunity. Historically, organized crime was actually a rural issue.
Right.
For most of human history, the vast majority of people lived in rural areas, so that is simply where the wealth was moving. You had pirates, highwaymen, bandits attacking trade routes purely because they were following the capital.
Okay, so they just went where the money was.
Exactly. And if we look at, say, Ming and Qing Dynasty China, we see the emergence of a highly sophisticated criminal network that was completely centered around fences.
Like the receivers of stolen goods.
Right, the fences. Because a bandit can steal goods on a trade route all day long, but without a fence to convert those goods into cash or, other usable resources, the theft is economically useless.
Right, you can't exactly walk into a local village and barter with a stolen horse without drawing a ton of attention.
Exactly. The fences were the essential liaisons bridging the gap between the violent criminal underground and polite, everyday society.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the specific types of fences they used are just brilliant from a logistical standpoint.
Oh, they were very clever.
Like, butchers were prime receivers for stolen livestock. Animals were incredibly valuable commodities in Ming China, but they were also easily identifiable by their owners. They had, specific markings.
Right, brands or specific traits.
Yeah. So a thief steals a cow, takes it to a corrupt butcher, and once that animal is slaughtered and cut up, the evidence is literally destroyed. It's completely untraceable meat. So a Ming Dynasty butcher hiding stolen cattle is basically the 15th century equivalent of a modern chop shop for stolen cars.
Yeah, the underlying mechanism is identical. It is all about anonymizing stolen assets to reintegrate them into the legitimate market. And what's fascinating here is how these early networks relied on the floating populations of society to function.
Floating populations?
Yeah, transient workers. You had itinerant barbers, for example. Because their trade required them to travel constantly from town to town, they acted as the perfect spies and information brokers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were gathering intelligence on which merchants were traveling with silver or which local magistrate was easy to bribe.
Yeah.
And then they sold that information to criminals looking for wealthy targets.
So they were basically the intelligence wing of the operation.
Precisely. You also had tea house owners and innkeepers who provided safe houses and broker deals in the back rooms. All of these figures existed in the liminal spaces.
The liminal spaces, right?
Yeah, they lived on the fringes of respectable society, operating in transient areas where governance was incredibly weak and people were just constantly moving.
So as human populations began to concentrate, we see this shifting from those rural trade routes into the growing industrializing cities, right?
Yes, exactly.
By the 19th century, we get the Victorian underworld in London. And this is where the modern template really starts to take shape. We start seeing distinct ranks within criminal groups.
The hierarchy starts forming?
Right. We see argot, which is a specialized criminal slang used to identify who is in and who is out, while obviously confusing the police. And we see the rise of real organizing bosses, like Adam Worth.
Oh, the Napoleon of crime?
Yeah, exactly. He was nicknamed the Napoleon of crime. He actually inspired the character of Professor Moriarty in the Sherlock Holmes stories, because he wasn't out there picking pockets himself, He was the web weaver.
He managed the big picture.
Yeah, he financed the operations, organized the bail money, and mapped out the scores for specialized teams.
And we see a similar structural evolution happening in the United States around the exact same time, but adapted to its own geography.
Right, the Wild West.
Yeah, during the Old West, the prevailing myth is the lone gunslinger robbing a train. But the reality is that you had complex syndicates like the Cochise Cowboys.
Oh, I've heard of them.
Yeah, they were running massive operations, smuggling stolen cattle back and forth across the Mexican border. And they were utilizing those same liminal spaces we saw in Ming China.
Those poorly controlled borderlands.
Exactly. Places where the rule of law simply couldn't reach and jurisdictions clashed. If a posse chased them, they just crossed an invisible line on a map and suddenly the law had no authority. Organized crime historically thrives wherever the state's reach is shortest.
That makes total sense. Yeah. But if we look at how these groups grow organically in these weak fringe spaces, whether that's a Victorian slum or a dusty border crossing, it forces us to reevaluate how they're actually structured today. I mean, I have a hard time buying the standard Hollywood narrative of the all-powerful boss sitting at the top of a perfect, clean corporate ladder.
Well, the corporate model is what we see in movies because it's incredibly easy to narrativize. It gives the audience a clear villain at the top.
Right.
It implies a complex authority structure, a strict division of labor, written rules. But for a criminal organization operating in the real world, that bureaucratic model is completely unworkable. It has fatal flaws.
Yeah, because keeping written records, which any bureaucracy needs to function, is a massive security risk. It is essentially building a roadmap for prosecutors to follow right to your front door.
Exactly. And it's more than just the records. Top-down communication in a strict, rigid hierarchy means that if lower levels are infiltrated by law enforcement or, if someone flips and cooperates, the entire upper echelon of the organization is suddenly jeopardized.
Like a house of cards.
Right, a house of cards effect. That is why so many organized crime structures are actually patron-client networks. They are fluid, they value familiarity, family ties, and tradition over a strict corporate org chart.
So it's less about climbing the corporate ladder.
Yeah, it's much more about managing overlapping spheres of influence.
Wait, so you're telling me the idea of an all-powerful cartel boss pulling every string might just be a convenient myth we tell ourselves to make the chaos make sense?
Yes, well, it's heavily stylized to fit a legal framework. This brings us to the economist Peter Reuter and his disorganized crime thesis.
Disorganized crime?
Yeah. Reuters argued that the idea of massive, omnipotent cartels and mafias operating like Fortune 500 companies is largely a rhetorical construct. Police and prosecutors use these neat charts because they simplify a complex, chaotic reality for juries.
Oh, that makes sense, like for the riot sham laws.
Exactly. It helps them secure convictions under laws designed to target corrupt organizations. But in truth, the criminal underworld is highly fragmented. It is composed of much smaller, fiercely competing cliques and temporary joint ventures.
So it's less like a monolithic evil corporation and more like a bunch of aggressive, independent contractors teaming up for specific projects when it suits them.
Teaming up and then splitting up or even fighting each other when the project is done. That is the entrepreneurial model. Criminals, fundamentally, are highly rational actors.
Right.
They are capitalizing on fluid group associations to maximize their profit while mitigating their legal and social risk. They don't want a massive bureaucracy weighing them down. They want agility.
They need to pivot.
Exactly. Pivot instantly when the market changes or when the police crack down on a specific route. This is the core of the enterprise theory. The idea that organized crime simply exists because legitimate markets leave customers unsatisfied.
I mean, it is unregulated capitalism in its most extreme, volatile form. If there is a massive public demand for something, whether that's narcotics, weapons, or illicit services, and the state bans it, the state hasn't eliminated the demand.
No, not at all.
They've just created a highly lucrative market vacuum. The syndicate steps in to fill that void, accepting the extreme risk of prison or death in exchange for astronomical profit margins that, frankly, legitimate businesses could never dream of.
And because these groups are essentially illegal corporations filling market voids, their activities inevitably spill over into the legitimate economy.
Well, sure.
Remember that $1.6 trillion figure? They have to launder that money. They cannot just keep it under a mattress. So they set up a vast array of front businesses.
And the fronts they use to wash this money are wild. You look into the mechanics of this, and it is way beyond the stereotypical waste management company or like a mob-run pizza parlor.
Oh, definitely.
Criminal syndicates are running tattoo parlors, daycares, zoos. There is even a massive tequila factory in Mexico collaborating directly with the Jalisco New Generation cartel.
A tequila factory.
Yeah. They use these cash-heavy or complex businesses to commingle their dirty money with legitimate revenue until it is completely impossible for forensic accountants to tell them apart. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because these syndicates are in the business of filling voids, they don't just supply illicit goods. They often step in to fill voids left by the government itself, particularly when it comes to local security and governance.
Right.
Which leads to the bizarre phenomenon of criminal vigilantism.
It sounds completely contradictory, right? That criminals would police their own neighborhoods. But from an economic standpoint, it is a very calculated move. Criminal syndicates often act as community police.
How does that work in practice?
Well, in many marginalized or deeply impoverished neighborhoods, the residents heavily distrust actual law enforcement, or, the police simply don't respond to calls. The state has failed to protect them, so the local gangs step in.
They become the police.
Exactly. They will actively punish muggers, bullies, or domestic abusers operating in their territory. They will sometimes even hold their own makeshift trials for offenders to publicly demonstrate their brand of justice.
It's like a twisted homeowners association. It's an HOA that fixes the potholes on your street and physically runs off the local burglars, but then they demand monthly extortion money from your small business and use horrific violence to enforce their neighborhood watch rules.
That's a dark way to put it, but yeah. And to understand why a community would ever accept that kind of coercive arrangement, sociologists point to social disorganization theory and this concept called anomie.
Anomie. What's that?
Anomie is a societal state of normlessness. When the state completely fails to provide security, legitimate avenues for financial success, or even basic social order, a massive vacuum of authority is created. The community feels abandoned.
So they're desperate for any kind of order.
Yes, the syndicate steps into that vacuum and creates its own twisted stability. They establish a new set of rules and norms that, while very violent, are at least predictable.
And the examples of this playing out in reality are just fascinating. In the U.S. prison system, you have massive prison gangs.
Yeah.
Groups that are heavily involved in narcotics trafficking and extortion inside and outside the walls.
Right.
Yet they will actively target and physically harm inmates who commit crimes against children or the elderly. Or look at rescuing.
Oh, the animal welfare group.
Yeah. It's an animal welfare organization where heavily tattooed outlaw biker gang members volunteer their time to physically break up illegal dogfighting rings and rescue abused pets.
Right.
It builds this intense local loyalty.
We see this dynamic scale up to a geopolitical level, too. Look at the origins of modern piracy off the coast of Somalia.
Oh, that's a great example.
The local Somali economy relied heavily on coastal fishing. But when the central government collapsed, foreign commercial vessels began illegally overfishing those waters and dumping toxic industrial waste off the coast, destroying the livelihoods of the locals.
And the state couldn't stop it.
Exactly. So Somali fishermen initially armed themselves and formed pirate syndicates to attack those foreign vessels simply to protect their own waters. The crazy part is, marine biologists actually noted that the local fishery began recovering because the pirate activity was so intense it kept the massive foreign trawlers away.
Wow. And when syndicates start acting as the defenders of their territory or their demographic, it inevitably leads to clashes with political or ideological groups. Like, historically speaking, just looking at the facts, Jewish mobsters like Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel were tapped by their own communities to forcefully break up and physically attack Nazi Bund meetings happening in the U.S. before World War II.
Right.
And during the Prohibition era, various ethnic gangs had incredibly violent street confrontations with the Ku Klux Klan, who were basically acting as militant enforcers of alcohol prohibition. And even in much more recent years, gangs like MS-13 have violently clashed with the Minuteman Project, which is a far-right paramilitary group. In that specific case, the gun was using violence to protect their highly profitable human smuggling routes across the U.S.-Mexico border from vigilante patrols.
In all of these instances, the political ideology is completely secondary to the syndicate's core motivation. The syndicate is acting to protect its business interests, its community base, or its geographic territory from an external threat, specifically when they feel the state is unable or unwilling to intervene.
It's all about protection of their assets.
Yes, and it is an incredibly effective strategy because it ingratiates them with the local population. A neighborhood that feels protected by the syndicate is a neighborhood that provides them with cover, silence from the police, and a steady stream of willing recruits.
Which brings us perfectly into the psychology of the syndicate. Understanding how these groups govern their communities brings us to why individuals are so willing to join them in the first place. I mean, if you were growing up in one of these neighborhoods, how does a regular person get pulled into this life?
Well, one of the most prominent frameworks for understanding this is the queer ladder of mobility, which is also known as ethnic succession.
Ethnic succession, okay.
The theory suggests that marginalized groups, often recent immigrants or heavily disenfranchised demographics, use organized crime as a ladder to attain wealth, status, and political power when the legitimate legal avenues to success are blocked by the dominant society.
So if the front door to the societal dream is padlocked, they're going to kick in the back door.
Exactly. And once that back door is kicked open, social learning theory takes over. Criminality isn't an innate trait. It is learned through association.
Right.
If a young person grows up in a heavily disorganized neighborhood where the legitimate role models, the teachers, the factory workers, are struggling and crushing poverty, but the local syndicate boss is driving a luxury car, handing out turkeys on Thanksgiving, and commanding absolute respect, well, the choice seems completely obvious to them.
They just emulate what looks successful.
Yes. Violence and extortion become normalized. They aren't seen as aberrations. They are seen as a valid countercultural authority.
But this is where we are witnessing a massive, profound evolution in real time. Because for centuries, that social learning required close physical proximity. You learned how to be a criminal from the guys standing on your street corner.
You saw it happening.
Yeah, you learned by watching the enforcer collect debts at the local bar. But today, the frontier of organized crime is the cyber frontier. We are seeing a massive paradigm shift. away from street-level rackets towards identity theft, massive internet fraud, and cyber warfare.
The whole landscape is changing.
We are talking about what the Pentagon calls the fifth domain of warfare. Criminal groups aren't just smuggling contraband. They are deploying highly sophisticated computer worms and Trojan horses to extort billions from financial institutions.
The scale of these modern, digitally enabled transnational groups is terrifying.
It really is.
Look at the Samgor Syndicate operating in Asia, which is also known as the Company. It was headed by a Chinese-Canadian named Se Chi Lop. They aren't fighting over street corners. They allegedly make $8 billion a year trafficking highly refined synthetic drugs like methamphetamine.
$8 billion a year. That's insane.
Yeah, and they function exactly like a massive, globally integrated transnational corporation, complete with supply chain managers and risk assessment analysts. But at the same time, law enforcement is evolving to meet this threat.
Right.
They are moving away from just kicking down doors and are heavily utilizing computational approaches, using artificial intelligence and big data to track sprawling online prostitution networks and to run predictive models on urban crime.
The entire battlefield is digitizing. Both the syndicates and the state are utilizing massive data sets to outmaneuver each other. But I have to ask, if the modern gangster is just a hacker sitting in a basement deploying a computer worm, do they still have that same social learning and countercultural loyalty? Or is it just pure detached greed now?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is undeniably a profound psychological shift. Technology creates a vast, insulating detachment between the perpetrator and the victim.
How so?
Well, when a syndicate operates a protection racket in a physical neighborhood, there is a visceral face-to-face interaction. The criminal sees the fear in the shop owner's eyes. They are deeply embedded in the community's social fabric, for better or worse.
Right, there's a human element.
Exactly. But when a hacker deploys a ransomware attack that shuts down a hospital's life-saving computer system from 3 continents away, that physical reality is completely absent. It completely changes the psychology of the offender.
Because they don't see the damage.
Yes. It relies far less on neighborhood loyalty or the physical intimidation of a rival gang, and much more on exploiting global vulnerabilities with absolute clinical detachment.
So what does this all mean? We started by picturing the Ming Dynasty barber quietly selling secrets about traveling merchants. We moved through the Victorian masterminds and the Old West cattle smugglers, all the way to entirely decentralized cyber syndicates generating billions of dollars without ever holding a gun.
It's a huge journey.
It is. And if there's one through line to take away from all these sources, it is that organized crime is not a static monolith. It is a constantly mutating organism. It is driven purely by entrepreneurial opportunism.
And it is crucial to understand that organized crime is not an anomaly. It is not simply a breakdown of the system. In many ways, it is a feature of it. It highlights exactly where our legitimate systems are failing.
Right. Whenever a system, whether that is a global financial economy, a local city government, or a massive internet network, leaves a gap or fails to satisfy a demand or fails to protect its vulnerable people, organized crime will instantly evolve to fill it.
It always does.
It is the ultimate opportunistic infection, always finding a way to thrive in those liminal spaces we keep leaving behind.
And that rapid adaptation is only accelerating, which actually raises an important and frankly unsettling question for you to think about as we wrap up.
Oh boy. Okay.
We've discussed how law enforcement is starting to heavily use AI and big data to predict crime and track these vast networks. But what happens when the syndicates start fully integrating their own AI?
Oh, man.
If organized crime is fundamentally about rational choice, the cold calculation of maximizing profit while minimizing risk, what does the future look like?
That's terrifying.
Imagine an algorithm optimizing illicit global supply chains in real time, instantly laundering money through millions of untraceable crypto microtransactions, and autonomously deploying cyber extortion to rival networks, all without a single human ever giving an order. Will the future crime boss even be human?
Wow. And just like that, the image of the smoke-filled room and the gravelly voice guy in a fedora is completely gone.
Long gone.
Replaced by a cold server rack silently running code in the dark, adapting faster than any human law enforcement agency ever could. It really makes you look at the invisible digital networks running our world a little differently. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
So, I want you to imagine that you're the greatest playwright in ancient Greece.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. You survive wars, you write these absolute masterpieces that will be studied for, like, millennia, and then you are killed because an eagle mistakes your bald head for a rock.
Oh, man.
And it just drops a tortoise right on it.
It's the ultimate cosmic joke. And the crazy part is it's a completely true story.
It really is. So today, for this deep dive, we are opening up one of the internet's most, I don't know, mesmerizing but definitely morbid rabbit holes.
Oh, absolutely.
We're looking at a single, incredibly dense Wikipedia page, and it's literally just titled Lists of Unusual Deaths.
Just right to the point.
Yeah. It's this enormous index covering weird, highly specific, just bizarre fatalities from antiquity all the way up to the modern era.
And, it even includes animal deaths and these incredibly granular subcategories.
Yeah, exactly. But our mission today, for you, the listener, isn't just to, like, gawk at the macabre. We want to understand what humanity's obsessive categorization of these weird fatalities actually tells us. Like, what does this say about our relationship with our own mortality?
Because fundamentally, cataloging these extremely rare circumstances, it's a coping mechanism.
Right.
Death is the ultimate unknown, right? It's the one thing we absolutely cannot control, no matter what we do.
Yeah, 100%.
But by taking the sheer chaotic nature of mortality and turning it into this hyper-organized listicle, sorting it by century or by cause or by biological stage, we attempt to exert some semblance of control over it.
We're telling ourselves that if we can index the darkness, maybe we can manage it.
Exactly. We tame it with paperwork.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because we are basically building a filing cabinet for the Grim Reaper here.
That's a great way to put it.
And looking at the historical section of this source, I mean, it really reads like an ancient version of the movie Final Destination, where fate just finds the most highly specific, almost comical loophole to get somebody. Take Aeschylus, the Greek playwright, with the tortoise we just talked about.
Right.
That story is so iconic, it echoes through centuries of literature. The source notes it was illustrated in the 15th century Florentine picture chronicle by Baccio Baldini.
Which is centuries later.
Exactly. And it was even dissected in a 1937 journal article by Ursula Hoff called Meditation in Solitude.
Wow.
So my question is, do we actually remember these specific people more for their lives? Or because the sheer irony of a falling tortoise hijacked their entire historical legacy?
That's a fascinating point. What's happening here is that the sheer absurdity of the event ensures its survival in the historical record. I mean, Aeschylus is a freak accident. But as the list brings us through other historical eras, we see different psychological reactions.
Like what?
Well, take Frederick Barbarossa in the 12th century.
Okay.
He was a Holy Roman Emperor, just a massive, larger-than-life military leader, and he died by drowning in a river that was reportedly waist-deep.
Which is just, I mean, that is an incredibly anticlimactic way for an emperor to go.
It's totally anticlimactic.
Yeah.
And that anticlimax is exactly why his death spawned all these enduring legends. People started whispering that he was actually still alive, just sleeping in a mountain cave.
Oh, right, like a King Arthur kind of myth.
Precisely. Because when a major figure dies suddenly in such bizarre or even mundane circumstances, it creates this psychological vacuum. The human mind it struggles to process that someone of such immense power could be taken out by shallow water.
It just doesn't compute.
Right. So denial sets in. Myth is born. The legend is society's way of rejecting an ending that just doesn't match the grand narrative of the person's life.
We rewrite the script because the reality is just too jarring.
Exactly.
But we see a totally different kind of jarring reality when we hit the 20th century with Franz Reichelt.
Ah, the flying tailor.
Yeah, the flying tailor. He literally jumped off the Eiffel Tower testing an early wearable parachute suit. And, well, it failed.
Right. And Reichelt represents another recurring theme in this list, which is the intersection of hubris, innovation, and, well, gravity.
Yeah, gravity always wins.
It really does. Unlike Aeschylus, whose death was a pure freak accident from the sky, Reichelt's death was a spectacular, very public collision between human ambition and the unforgiving laws of physics.
Which kind of transitions us nicely because the narrative totally shifts as we move from those historical legends into the modern era.
It does, yeah.
We stop getting these grand mythical stories of emperors and inventors, and the page's taxonomy just sort of fractures into these bizarrely specific, almost mundane sublists.
Oh, the sublists are wild.
I mean, just look at some of these categories in the source. Death by coconut, death by vending machine, death from laughter, autoerotic fatality, spontaneous human combustion.
It's quite a variety.
And then we get to modern technology, right? There's literally a list of selfie-related injuries and deaths.
It's a stark transition.
Yeah.
The focus really zooms in on the hazards of our immediate everyday environment.
But wait, I'm struggling with this a bit.
Okay, why?
Well, why do we need an entirely separate Wikipedia classification for death by vending machine or death by coconut? Like, isn't a falling coconut really just blunt force trauma?
Technically, yes.
So are we getting overly obsessed with the specifics, or is this page trying to tell us we're just getting clumsier as a species?
No, it's not about being clumsy. Think about your daily routine. You probably walked past a vending machine today, right?
Yeah, in the lobby.
And you might have taken a selfie recently. We interact with these mundane objects constantly, with zero expectation of danger. They are the absolute definition of modern safety and convenience.
Right, they're invisible to us.
Exactly. So when an object that mundane becomes an instrument of death, it shatters our illusion of security.
Oh, I see. It reminds you that gravity and mass are always in play, even in the break room.
Precisely. A coconut is just a piece of fruit, right? Until gravity turns it into a projectile. These hyper-specific lists mirror our modern anxieties.
Yeah.
Because despite all our societal safeguards, we are still fragile biological creatures navigating a very physical world.
But what about the entertainment aspect of all this?
The entertainment aspect.
Yeah, because the text points out that as a culture, we consume these bizarre deaths as media.
Oh, right, of course.
We have the Darwin Awards, we have that show, 1,000 Ways to Die, and even stupid deaths from the show Horrible Histories.
Yeah, it's whole genre.
So if hearing that a vending machine can crush me makes me anxious, how does laughing at a Darwin Award winner make me feel safer? Doesn't that just feed the anxiety?
I'd actually argue the exact opposite. It acts as a pressure valve for that anxiety.
Really? How so?
Psychologically, consuming these stories in a comedic or awarding format provides a vital sense of distance. When you listen to a story about someone, say, shaking a vending machine until it tips over on them, you are participating in a form of defensive distancing.
Defensive distancing.
Yeah, you laugh to draw a firm line between yourself and the victim.
Oh, okay. So I tell myself, well, I would never violently shake a massive heavy machine, therefore I am safe.
That is the exact mechanism. We categorize it as a stupid death to attribute the bizarre event to a personal failing of the victim.
Wow.
Because it is so much easier to believe someone died because they were foolish than to accept the terrifying truth, which is that the universe is random and cruel, and fatal accidents can happen to anyone at any time.
That makes total sense. We are constantly trying to put up mental walls to protect ourselves.
We absolutely are.
But here's where it gets really interesting and honestly a bit intimidating.
Yeah.
Because once we move past the causes of these unusual deaths, the falling horses and the vending machines, this Wikipedia page just drops down into a massive, incredibly dense navigational index. And it's simply titled Death.
The clinical side of it.
Exactly. It outlines the entire biological and clinical infrastructure of mortality. It contrasts the chaos of how people die with this intensely rigid scientific precision of what happens next.
It's a profound pivot in the source material. We transition from the unpredictable events of life into the deeply predictable biological reality of the dying process itself.
And reading it, it's honestly like reading a highly programmed reverse puberty itinerary.
Reverse puberty. That's an interesting way to look at it.
Well, let's unpack that, because with puberty, your body runs this incredibly complex hormonal script to build you up, right? It changes you over years.
Right, it's constructive.
But according to this index, the moment the heart stops, a brand new chemical script fires up to tear you down. And it is just as rigid and scheduled as the one that built you.
That is a brilliant analogy, actually, because the biological teardown is so systematic. The text outlines the stages under after death. First, you have pallor mortis.
Which is what exactly?
That's the immediate paleness that sets in as blood stops circulating. It happens very quickly. Then you move into algor mortis, which is the steady drop in body temperature as you slowly acclimate to the room temperature.
Because algor means cold, right?
Yes, exactly. Followed by livor mortis. That's where gravity really takes over and the stagnant blood begins to pool at the lowest points of the body. It creates this purplish discoloration.
Which is, yeah, pretty grim.
It is. And then, of course, there's rigor mortis, the famous stiffening of the muscles caused by chemical changes in the tissue.
Right.
It is a strict itinerary leading eventually, as the page lists, to putrefaction and skeletonization.
And what's wild to me is that this clinical terminology goes all the way down to the microscopic level. Like,
Hey.
the index lists different types of cellular death, which I had no idea were so deeply categorized.
Oh, the cellular level is fascinating.
Yeah. Like, you have apoptosis,
Yeah.
which the source describes as programmed cell death.
Yeah, the word apoptosis actually comes from ancient Greek. It means falling off, like
Yeah.
leaves falling from a tree in autumn.
Oh, wow. I like that.
Yeah, it's poetic. It's the body's tidy, intentional way of sweeping up old or damaged cells without causing any inflammation.
But then you contrast that with necrosis.
Right. Necrosis is the messy, explosive cell death that's caused by external trauma or infection or lack of blood supply. It causes surrounding inflammation. It's chaotic.
And then there's an even more obscure term listed in there, autoschisis,
Autoschisis.
which literally translates to self-splitting. It's a specific type of cell death where the cell essentially cuts itself in half. The text mentions it's often observed in cancer treatment.
It just sounds like a dark magic spell, honestly. Self-splitting.
It really does. But what really caught my eye in this medical section wasn't just the neat categories, it was the anomalies.
Ah, right. Biology doesn't always read the textbook.
Exactly. Because despite all those rigid Latin terms and predictable stages, biology is messy. The body doesn't always cooperate with the schedule.
It definitely doesn't.
The list covers phenomena like the Lazarus sign, which, according to the source, is a reflex movement in brain-dead patients where their arms might briefly raise up and cross over their chest.
It's just electrical impulses misfiring in the spinal cord, but...
But you can imagine how terrifying that would be to witness.
Oh, absolutely. It would look like they were waking up.
Yeah. And then there's Lazarus syndrome, where blood circulation just spontaneously returns after CPR has been completely stopped.
Which is incredibly rare, but it happens.
And then there are incredibly unsettling terms on this list, like coffin birth.
Yeah, that one is, well, it sounds like horror fiction, but it's a purely mechanical, biological process.
How does that even work?
Historically, if a pregnant woman passed away, the gases building up inside her abdomen during putrefaction could literally force the fetus out of the body post-mortem.
Oh, wow.
It's grim, really grim. But it highlights how the physics and chemistry of the body continue to operate long after consciousness is actually gone.
And speaking of consciousness being gone, this index draws a massive distinction between clinical death and brain death.
Yes, that's a very important modern distinction,
It even introduces the concept of the beating heart cadaver.
which brings up a huge philosophical and medical gray area. A beating heart cadaver is a human body that is entirely brain dead, meaning all neurological function has irreversibly ceased. But the heart is kept beating artificially, usually on a ventilator.
To preserve organs for donation, right?
Exactly, to keep the organs viable.
So the line between life and death isn't just a simple switch that flips from on to off.
Far from it. It's a fading gradient.
A gradient.
Yes, the sheer volume of this specialized medical vocabulary exists because human technology has advanced to a point where we can literally pause the dying process.
Wow, we can literally pause it.
We can. We need terms like clinical death, which is when the heart stops, versus brain death, because a stopped heart can often be restarted today, whereas brain death is absolute. Society requires this immense glossary just to draw a sharp legal and ethical line in what is actually a very, very murky biological transition.
And that murky transition requires a staggering amount of administration. Which really brings us to the final major theme of this source text.
The societal aftermath.
Exactly. Because once biology finally gives out and the process actually concludes, society has to step in to deal with the aftermath. And the human engineering surrounding death is just vast.
It is an entire industry, an entire ecosystem. Death isn't just a biological conclusion, right? It is a massive societal undertaking.
I was absolutely blown away by the sheer volume of niche terms for body disposal on this list. Like, most of us just think of burial or cremation.
Yeah, standard auctions.
But under the Disposal and Preservation Index, it lists sky burial.
Which is a fascinating practice.
It really is. The source notes it's often practiced in Tibet, where a body is left on a mountaintop to decompose naturally or be eaten by scavenging birds, just returning the nutrients directly to the earth.
It's an ecologically deeply integrated method. It treats the body as part of the natural cycle.
But then the list swings to the extreme opposite end of the technological spectrum.
Right into the laboratory.
Right. We have things like premation and resumation. These sound like concepts from a sci-fi novel.
They do sound sci-fi, but they are very real emerging technologies.
Can you explain premation?
Sure. Premation involves freeze-drying a human body using liquid nitrogen until it is completely brittle, and then It's vibrated until it shatters into a fine organic dust.
Wow. Just vibrated into dust.
Exactly. And then resomation, on the other hand, is water cremation. It uses alkaline hydrolysis.
Alkaline hydrolysis.
Yeah, it's a mix of water, heat, and specific chemicals to rapidly dissolve the body's tissues. It leaves only the bones, which are then crushed to ash.
It's the ultimate dust to dust, but executed with, like, advanced chemistry.
Exactly. And then, of course, on the preservation side, you have cryopreservation, freezing the body in hopes of future revival and plastination.
Right, replacing bodily fluids with polymers to perfectly preserve the anatomy, like you see in those museum exhibits.
Yes. But what's crucial to notice here is the shift in agency.
What do you mean?
Well, think about the unusual deaths at the beginning of our deep dive. With the falling tortoise or the vending machine, humanity was at the mercy of chaotic, unpredictable forces.
Right, totally helpless.
But with permeation, resomation, and plastination, humanity is reasserting control. We dictate the exact chemical and physical terms of how the body breaks down.
Oh, I see. We are getting the last word.
Precisely. We take control back.
And that desire for control, it bleeds right out of the mortuary and into our legal and political systems. The societal concepts listed in this index are mind-bending, like, for example, the micromort.
Oh, the micromort is a fascinating conceptual tool.
Yeah, the text defines it as a unit of risk. It's defined as a 1 in a million chance of death.
Right. Statisticians and actuaries use it to quantify and compare the danger of everyday activities.
So skydiving might cost you 8 or 9 micromorts, while just like walking down the stairs might just be a fraction of 1.
Exactly. By putting a strict mathematical value on the probability of dying, we take the paralyzing fear of the unknown and we turn it into a manageable spreadsheet.
We turn death into a spreadsheet.
We really do.
And we also see societal structures trying to manage the causes of death, like karoshi.
The Japanese term.
Yeah, translating literally to overwork death, where occupational stress triggers fatal heart attacks or strokes. The fact that a society needs a specific legal term for dying at your desk, I mean, it shows how deeply intertwined modern economics and mortality have become.
And our legal system is forced to litigate all of this too. The index references the death-qualified jury.
What's that?
It's a specific legal protocol in the United States where jurors in capital cases are heavily screened to ensure they are legally and morally capable of imposing the death penalty.
It's society institutionalizing the taking of a life.
Exactly. Which perfectly aligns with the concept of necropolitics.
Yeah.
It's another term found in this massive web of information.
Necropolitics.
Yeah, it's a philosophical theory about how ultimate political power is essentially the power to dictate who lives and who must die.
Yeah.
Whether that's through warfare or healthcare access or capital punishment.
Yeah.
Society is constantly administering mortality.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I mean, we have legal screenings for juries. We have mathematical metrics like micromorts to tell us if our commute is too dangerous.
Right.
And completely different, highly technological ways to dispose of a body. It feels like we are actively trying to tame the terrifying unpredictability of mortality by just burying it in paperwork.
That's exactly what we're doing. If we can measure it, if we can legislate it and build infrastructure around it, it feels less like a looming monster in the dark and more like a municipal hazard.
Like fixing a pothole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We maintain a sense of agency over the aftermath, even if we couldn't control the unusual death that kicked off the whole process.
It is honestly incredible to look at it all laid out like this.
It really gives you a new perspective.
It does. I mean, we started this deep dive looking at a Wikipedia page titled Lists of Unusual Deaths. And it felt like we were just going to read morbid trivia about falling tortoises and malfunctioning vending machines.
Which is how most people probably read that page.
Right. But stepping back to view the whole picture, the whole index, it serves a profound purpose. Reading about these freak accidents reminds us of the profound fragility of life.
It does.
But zooming out to see the biological teardown scripts, the legal frameworks, and the complex disposal methods like permeation, it reminds us of the incredible lengths human beings go to in order to document, understand, and ultimately manage the inevitable.
It is a massive testament to our resilience and our endless need to organize the dark.
Oh, Sud.
And there is one final provocative thought I want to leave everyone with. And it's actually inspired by a very specific detail at the very top of the source text.
Oh, you mean the banner warning from the editors?
Yes. Right at the top of the unusual deaths page, there's a disclaimer that reads, and I quote, "This is a dynamic list and may never be able to satisfy particular standards for completeness."
May never be able to satisfy.
Right. It is, by definition, an eternally unfinished document.
Because history keeps happening, and people keep living.
And pushing boundaries and making mistakes.
So the question for you, the listener, to ponder today is this. Given our ever-evolving technology, our rapidly changing environment, and our endless, reckless human curiosity, will we ever reach a point of ultimate safety where the list of unusual deaths finally stops growing?
That's a good question.
Or does human ingenuity guarantee that as long as we exist, we will always find entirely new, unprecedented, and bizarre ways to exit the stage?